I'm Juliana Forlano. You're watching ACT.tv. Our next guest is Alex Vitale, whose book, The End of Policing, is providing the scholarship fueling the mass movement to defund the police. The book is revolutionary, not only for its vision of a future that involves investing in communities instead of mass criminalization, but also for the ways that it exposes the deeply rooted racism that goes back to the founding of policing as an institution. The book is now completely free to download on Verso Books. Thank you, Verso. Alex Vitale, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Juliana. Happy to be here.
I don't know if you know this, but I also teach at Brooklyn College. Did you know that? Isn't that funny?
No, I don't think so. What department?
Media studies. I was an adjunct there for quite a long time, took a break. So now I'm just doing the media instead of teaching the media. But still, here we are.
Sometime we can talk academic union politics then.
Oh, yeah. I think actually my husband is also a professor there, and the union they're all, union members are taking a day off today. They're doing a strike, I guess, today to support the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes, that's right. I've been just recently finished a term as a vice president of the CUNY union. So it's very exciting to see the level of activism to both support the Black Lives Matter movement and to defend adjuncts who are being put on the chopping block to cover the COVID budget shortfalls. So, among other reasons why we need to cut the police budget is so that we can adequately fund public higher education.
Exactly. And that's a whole nother conversation we should have you come back on. You and I could definitely chat about that, what having a full adjunct load teaching the courses does to the students anyway when you underpay the adjuncts, what it does to the quality of education. Then at Brooklyn, we just started paying the adjuncts properly, and now all of a sudden they want to cut everyone. So it's a whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Properly is I guess it's a step in the right direction. We have a lot more to work to do on wage equity too.
Isn't that the truth? Well, let's go over to the topic of the current moment. Can you give us a quick historical overview of the police as an institution? How did policing start, and how has it evolved?
Yeah, we have this idea that police have just always existed, and this just isn't true. Policing has mostly just been around about less than 200 years. And we also have this kind of liberal myth that policing exists to keep us safe, that it exists to neutrally enforce the law. And this is not really how police forces get formed. Usually liberals point to the formation of the London Metropolitan Police in 1829 as the first modern police force. And they talk about how great it is that they're policing by consent and that it's a professional organization. But what they don't talk about is where this idea came from. The London police were created by Sir Robert Peel, Bob, the Bobbies. But the job that he had before creating the police was that he was in charge of the English colonial occupation of Ireland. And he creates during that time the Irish Peace Preservation Force to put down so-called agricultural outrages, which are really peasant uprising against British landlords. And he can't rely on the military anymore because they're all tied up with Napoleon. So he says, I need a force that's cheaper, more nimble, that can act proactively and preventatively to prevent uprisings from getting out of hand so that we can embed them in local communities and give them more legitimacy in the eyes of the public. And then he takes that model to use against this new working class that's flooding into London to be part of the industrial economy. And he uses them to break strikes, to break up working class pleasures like public drunkenness and prostitution and things like that. In the US, we have that dynamic, but we also have the history of using police to manage slavery in the big cities of the South. We had our own colonial police forces like the Texas Rangers. So policing gets formed in relationship to these mechanisms of exploitation. And today we don't really have slavery and colonialism in those forms. We barely have industrialization, right? What we have is neoliberal austerity politics, mass homelessness, mass untreated mental illness, mass involvement in black markets because people don't have adequate jobs. And that's what police do, is they manage the consequences of that system.
And they're completely incapable, no offense to police, if you don't believe me, but they're incapable of doing that because they don't have the training. I'm a social worker by training, so they don't have the training to deal with some of the problems other than just smash and bash and incarcerate. It's insane.
Police are violence workers. That's what distinguishes them from other parts of government. And that's why they've been used to manage resistance to exploitation. So when we turn a problem over to the police to manage, we are unleashing violence on people. So I always say, if you don't want violence, if you don't want racism, if you don't want economic inequality, don't get the police involved, because that's what you're inviting into that scenario. I always say, the police don't have the tools we need, right? They don't have affordable housing. They don't have access to high quality drug treatment services. They don't have mental health services. They just got guns and handcuffs.
You wrote about the unspoken reality that the police aren't actually preventing crime. Isn't that their one job? How is it that we're arming them to the teeth and giving them unlimited power, and they're not even doing the one thing they're supposed to be doing?
In the absence of anything to manage, social behavior, sure, there would be more predatory behavior by some people. But that's not really what the police do. They're not chasing bank robbers. They're not catching serial killers. They won't even test rape kits. I mean, the vast majority of serious crimes are never even reported to the police. The ones that are reported, the majority are never even investigated seriously. Clearance rates for serious crimes are very low. Even with homicide, it's often fewer than 50%. But all of this is entirely reactive. Mm-hmm. They only show up after the damage has been done.
Yeah, they're not doing much. So
they're doing a lot. A lot of it's just really harmful.
Oh, well, yeah. The movement to defund the police. I would like to use this platform, if we can, to talk about what that movement is about. I think it scares people who have been led to believe that without the police, we would devolve into pandemonium and their property values would drop, or they would get physically harmed, their children would be raped. How can you clear? I would like to use this platform to clear up what that is about, so that we can all fight against our parents when they start giving us Fox News talking points.
I think some of that concern is, obviously driven by Fox News and the right wing that's doing everything it can to undermine this movement for economic and racial justice. But also some of this is driven by a kind of white privilege, that people just assume that everybody benefits equally from policing, and that this is the way that we get those people to not attack us. It's this assumption that everyone is just waiting for the opportunity to run wild in the streets, raping and robbing people. And there's a little bit of racism in that, because it's always about those people. Mm-hmm. Now, having said all that, the defund the movement, and anybody can just spend 15 minutes on the internet and get a really clear idea about what this is about. This is about concrete struggles going on right now all across the country to shift police spending into community-identified needs designed to make us safer. This movement is about producing safety. And for so many communities in our country, the police are a source of unsafety. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to understand that these movements they are professionals trying to tell us how to actually make communities safer.
And what would those programs look like?
So one of the things we need to do is we need to acknowledge that the public safety challenges in all communities are not the same. So we got to start by a kind of community needs assessment. Is this about an opioid overdose crisis? Is it about a crisis of burglaries? Is it a crisis of youth violence? Is it a crisis of public homelessness? And then we have specific targeted interventions to address each of those problems. So, a huge amount of what police do is go on mental health crisis calls. We need to both create baseline mental health services in the community so that people don't have a crisis, and we need to create a non-police 24/7 crisis response capacity so that our response to people in crisis is not someone with a gun. This is done in other places. Both New York and Los Angeles have detailed plans in place by elected officials that could get police out of the mental health business. This looks like bringing in community-based anti-violence strategies that hire people from the community to work with young people from a position of mutual respect and understanding to try to break the cycle of violence. Almost all youth violence is committed by young people who have themselves been the victim of violence. And we have to break that cycle with competent trauma counseling that's culturally appropriate, that speaks to the reality of these kids, instead of using the police and waving a moralizing finger at them. So we need to get police out of schools and all kinds of stuff.
Police provide a nice cover for austerity that undermines any kind of sort of life-affirming, community-based programs and processes that help connect people. It's very interesting.
That's exactly right. And the fact that big city Democratic mayors are overwhelmingly responsible for this says just how degraded American politics has become.
Talk more about that, please. Give us the history there.
Sure. So there's a bipartisan consensus about turning every social problem in the sun over to the police to manage. And it's about this
because of the labor unions, the police labor.
No, I mean, that's a source of resistance that has to be overcome, but it's much bigger than that, right? It's this idea that we have no choice in the face of neoliberalism and global competition except to use government to subsidize the already most successful parts of the economy in hopes that some of that will magically trickle down to the rest of us. And as we were just talking about CUNY, right? I've been there over 20 years. I haven't seen any trickle down yet, right? Yeah. This has created massive inequality, mass homelessness, mass untreated mental illness, mass substance abuse problems, mass involvement in black markets. And then these mayors, rather than taking on the need for economic redistribution, turn it over to the police to put a lid on it. And that leads to criminalization, violence, racism, and mass incarceration.
That's not. What has it been like for you to watch the defund the police movement gain real traction, with cities like Minneapolis promising to disband their police reforms, Bill de Blasio at least taking some of the money away from the police here in New York? You wrote The End of Policing about 3 years ago. Did you expect these kinds of developments?
I had the deal to write this book for Verso before Ferguson happened, before Eric Garner was killed. I mean, I thought I was writing a little novelty piece for some prison abolitionists to get them to think a bit more seriously about the role of police. So it's been overwhelming, obviously gratifying. It's a huge burden too, because whether I like it or not, I am one of many spokespeople for the movement now. And the media attention that I'm getting, means that I have to be mindful of its impact on this movement. And I'm trying to be in touch with people on the ground and people doing this work to be accountable to the movement. So, but it's a lot of pressure, and I'm doing 10 or 12 interviews a day to try to. I saw
you on the Daily Show yesterday, and I appreciate you coming here.
Yeah, I'm scheduled to be on Wolf Blitzer and Don Lemon tonight on CNN. I'm on NPR so let me give you later.
The hard questions then. This is a softball, we're on your side type of interviews. Over there, you're going to get questions like, with no police, won't everyone be raping everybody? That's what you're going to get.
Yeah, well, I think that's important to get that out in the open and to bust that bubble, right? That both the extent to which it's just a bunch of right-wing talking points and the extent to which there are, legitimate concerns about this. So, yeah, we need people out there answering those questions, because the defund police movement is, something that fits on a sign or a hashtag, but this movement has always been about more than that. And it requires some explanation. It can't be reduced down to a hashtag. So we need to have all these voices out there telling people what this movement is really about, and how they can become a part of it.
We're speaking to Professor Alex Vitale, the author of The End of Policing. Alex, could you talk about the concerns that, I mean, you touched on this a moment ago, but I think this is going to be the hot button issue. Okay, let's say we have school resource counselors in the schools to deal with kids' behavioral issues instead of sending them to prison. We have mental health counselors, for the drug issues. But what about the crime? I mean, what about, I think it's going to be difficult for people to be like, that's a great, I think people will say that's a great idea, but we also still want police.
Look, we have concrete evidence-based interventions to reduce shootings, to reduce homicides, to reduce sexual assaults, to reduce burglaries, right? We have to get over this idea that chasing people around with guns is the only possible way to make our society healthier and safer. It's just not true.
We have a quote
We
coming in.
have evidence about, using community-based anti-violence programs to reduce domestic violence, to reduce youth violence. This is not just about, hiring a few social workers. This is about a transformation of community safety. It's a new vision of justice. And my book is filled with hundreds of examples of how this is being done on the ground all over the world.
And the book is free. Go read it at Verso at the publishing house. We have some comments coming in from the stream chat. Our friend Bike Shop Guru on Twitch says, what causes mental issues? That is where you start. Housing, food, education to start. Take those issues away and a huge amount of the mental issues disappear. And when you address those issues, you create jobs. This is another issue. And then Jack's Road chimes in, when employees of those jobs are treated as essential, it can go a long way toward deflecting mental health issues. Another person in our Facebook chat chimes in to say, for-profit prisons are just wanting to keep the dollars flowing. It's not a mystery, a business plan and a mafia police to keep it going. Your thoughts about the for-profit prison industry?
So obviously I'm against for-profit prisons. But the problem is so much bigger than that. I mean, if it were just about a few companies trying to make a couple $100 million here or there, I think we could get a handle on this. This is about the entire political direction of the country. It's about politicians in both parties thinking that they can get elected by putting millions of people in prison in ways that allow them to loot the economy on behalf of the richest people in the world. I mean, that's what this is really about. The drug war wasn't about public health or public safety or private prisons. It was about a rancid politics of racial resentment that allowed the Republicans to get into office and loot the economy. We've got to follow the money, but we're following it at the wrong level. We've got to think much bigger about this.
Alex Vitale, thank you so much for coming on our program. I really, really appreciate it. And, just getting people to envision what the world would look like without police is a revolution in consciousness. And, only good can come of this, I hope. What do you make of President Trump's statement that we're not going to defund the police? There's going to be police everywhere. I'm going to put a police in your school, in your toilet, in your, his response has been, less than stellar.
What he's making clear to me is that every big city mayor in the United States who refuses to cut the police budget next year is aiding and abetting the Trump political program. That's what I think. of turning.
How much do you think they need to cut the budget? Like, what are we looking at when Bill de Blasio cuts the budget by whatever percentage? Is that good enough, or did he fail us? Like, what are we looking at?
So it's about a process. I think we've identified credibly $1 billion we could cut out of the NYPD budget right away and redirect as much of that as possible into community needs. But we have to keep building up the community infrastructure as we dial back policing. These have to be done in tandem. So I think that there is a lot more that can be cut, but it's going to take time both to develop the political power and to put these counter institutions into place.
Oh, I do think de Blasio is just itching to get back at the police. I mean, they have not been supporting him. He's had to tap dance around them this whole time, and I don't know.
But he has not shown any backbone so far.
No, he said, "Oh, I need to understand the Black experience," and he has a Black wife and 2 multiracial children. Come on, what are we, morons here?
He's facing this open revolt in his own administration and in his own family, and yet he continues to kowtow to the police, and that is the Trump agenda.
Mm-hmm. 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 So another reason, but if we get Biden in, it doesn't seem like it's going to get, better. You mentioned earlier that the Democrats are complicit.
Yeah, the situation in Washington is much worse, I think. I see a lot of possibility in these local struggles, but the situation in Washington is really bad. The leadership of the Democratic Party does not get it. Biden certainly doesn't get it. Shoot him in the leg instead of shooting him in the heart. That is not what anyone is talking about. What are we doing to reduce the burden of federal law enforcement? Get rid of Operation Relentless Pursuit. Repeal Sesta Fosta that criminalizes sex work. Quit giving police military hardware. There are concrete things the feds could do, and nobody's taking that seriously.
Well, that's because the military-industrial complex doesn't have a war right now. They got to make money somehow, Alex.
Well, that is certainly part of it. That's certainly part of it. But also they think they can fix this with implicit bias training in another Department of Injustice investigation. And this is just lunacy.
Professor Vitale, author of The End of Policing, thank you for joining us today. And thank you for, not backing down from the mantle that has been placed upon you in this very important moment in history. I just want to thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I look forward to seeing you on with CNN. We're all going to be cheering you for, we look forward to you on Fox.
I'll do my best. There's not always a lot of room to maneuver in these things, but yes. Yeah,
well, just keep talking. When they I used to train people how to be on the media. When they talk, when they cut you off, just keep talking. Because unless they cut your mic off, you're still going out over the airwaves, and you don't need to, I'm giving advice, but you don't need to win the host, you need to win the viewers. So just keep talking, even if they try to cut you off.
Great advice. Great advice.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to seeing the next move, and hopefully you'll come back and join us as this movement unfolds.
Absolutely, Juliana. Be well.
All right, I'll see you around the campus.